Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Hi, today we are going to make pear pie. It's one of Mike's favorite dishes. It's a good way to use pears. We get pears from Costco. We always get them in the case. We can never eat them all before they start to go brown. So, I started this recipe, and as far as Mike's concerned, this is the only thing you do with pears. We're going to make the crust first. I will put the recipe below, so I'm not going to worry about exact measurements right now to let you know. We have butter in the bowl, and in my sifter I have flour and a little bit of baking powder. So I'm going to sift that into the butter. And this is pretty much any general crust that you're going to make for any kind of pie. This is the way I make it. So you take your butter and your flour mixture, and you could use a pastry tool. I use a fork in my hands. So what you want to do is get the flour and the butter incorporated so that you have a coarse meal. So you'll see the butter start to break up, and it's going to be little pieces of butter. You don't want it mixed so fine that you can't feel the butter. We want the butter as it melts when baking to make that crust really flaky. This is going to be this crust is a recipe that I have for a bottom crust and a top crust. My pear pie is not going to use a top crust. So I will take that remaining dough and refrigerate it for another use. So my flour and butter is incorporated. So anytime you do a crust, you want to handle it as little as possible. You want it to be tender, you want it to be flaky. You don't want it to handle it a lot. So my liquid mixture is 1 egg, 5 tablespoons of ice cold water, just because I know that one, and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. So I'm going to pour this in, and I'm as little as possible. You want to handle this dough as little as possible. So I'm going to mix this egg and vinegar and water mixture in very lightly. I'm going to put a little flour on my surface. I'm going to go to my hands now because I want to get this till it just sticks together so that I can roll it out. So real gently, I'm just mixing that liquid in with the flour. And this is the biggest trick with a pie crust, is you want to handle it as little as possible so that it's flaky and yummy. Hopefully you can see I'm just using the dough on one side that's a little damp to pick up the flour on the bottom of the bowl. And you see I have my pie plate there ready to go for my crust. Okay, so all the pieces are pretty incorporated. I'm just going to take this. You don't want it to stick to the surface, so you need some flour. You don't want to stick it to the rolling pin, so you want to put a little flour on that. So here's the crust ready to go. If this was just one crust, I would just roll this out. I know that there's enough for a top crust, so I'm going to take about 1/3 of this dough and just pinch it off and set it over to the side. This is going to be my bottom crust. So again, we want to handle it as little as possible. It doesn't really matter if the crust looks perfect. As you can see, and you'll see it when I put it in the pan, there's a little bit of layers here. That's fine. You're going to put a filling in it. None of that's going to show. Like I said, the clue is you want to work it as little as possible. So I'm testing my pie, the size of my pan. Okay, that's it. That wasn't hard. Was that hard? That was not hard. Okay, so we're going to take this and move it over a little bit. I'm going to take this crust, ease it into the dish. Now I'm going to flute the edges. When I was a little girl watching my mom grow up, I just thought this was magic. So hopefully you can see this. I'm picking up the dough between my fingers, and then I'm just pinching it. And I'm going to circle the pan or the dish. I'm taking this bit of dough that's underneath and I'm tucking it under and pinching that. And there's our fluted pie crust. So this recipe calls for an uncooked pie crust. So I'm going to set the pie crust aside. We're going to go ahead and use this floured board for right now. It's not a big deal. So the first thing we're going to do is make a custard. So the first part of the custard is melted butter. Okay, so I have some melted butter here. This is actually 2 sticks of butter. And we are going to whisk ingredients into. So the butter is melted. You don't need it hot. You just need it enough to melt it. So I have some flour and a little bit of nutmeg. This is going to thicken the custard. So I'm going to mix that in first really well. Incorporate that. And then I have 3 eggs. So flour, nutmeg, and butter so far is all that's in here. I'm going to put the eggs in one at a time and mix these up. The only reason I do it one at a time is just to make sure that each one is mixed up really well. This is thickening as I'm mixing in the eggs, which is exactly what you want. So you can see how the custard is just really thickened up. So this is going to get poured on top of the pears. Perfect. Look at how beautiful that custard is. Again, how many minutes did that take? Not a very difficult thing to do. So next we're going to take our pears and put them in the pie crust. So I have my chicken bucket here that I'm going to put my pear peels in. And I'll show you how to do one, and then I'll lay it in the pan. We're going to take 3 pears. We're going to slice them into 8ths and put them in the bottom of the pie crust. And then we'll pour that custard over the top. You know what? I just realized there is one part of the recipe that I forgot. When I'm making the custard, I did not put the sugar in the custard. So we're going to add that right now. And most of my recipes that I have for pies or anything like that, I actually have written out, as I will put in the recipe here. So even though I made the recipe, I still go back afterwards, or while I'm doing the recipe, and make sure I haven't missed anything. So I had the sugar laid out there. Alright, custard's ready to go. Alright, so let me show you how we just do 1 pear, and then I'll go back and do the rest. So I'm just going to take it and slice it. If you said 8ths, then that means each of these pieces would be 4. But it's not that big of a deal. We're just going to arrange them in the pie. And again, it doesn't really matter how you arrange them in the pie because the custard is going to cover that all up and it's going to bake together. This is just a pear pie. In other words, no other fruit or anything in it. And this is Mike's favorite way to do it. But I'll put a couple of variations in the bottom of the recipe here. I've used berries. I've thrown some raspberries in here, which is lovely. I've made a chocolate sauce for on top. My mother would call that gilding the lily, because this recipe with the butter and the sugar, a little bit of nutmeg, is really very sweet and satisfying. Okay, so all the pear is in the crust. And I have my custard here. So in the custard I have sugar and butter and nutmeg and flour. All we're going to add to this, and the eggs, remember the eggs. We're going to add a half a teaspoon of almond. Obviously I measure. And a teaspoon of vanilla. Whisk this in, and then we're going to pour this over the crust. So before I put my pie in the oven, I like to put it on a baking sheet. That way if there's anything that boils over the top, it's not going to get the oven dirty. And you won't have that burn smell. So I have my custard. I'm going to pour it over my pears. Nothing complicated about this. If you use some of the variations and added different fruit, you could use different seasonings. The only thing I have here is the vanilla, the almond, and a little bit of nutmeg mixed in with that flour. But if you wanted to, say, add strawberries to it, you could add another seasoning. All right, so the pears are all covered. Custard's there. You can just see a little bit of the flake of the nutmeg in there. The oven is on 350 degrees. I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to rotate it to 180 and look at it again. It's probably going to take about 45 minutes for this to get baked all the way. But I will let you know as soon as it comes out of the oven to show you how it looks. So the pear pie is in the oven. We have this little bit of dough. So you could wrap this in plastic wrap or some kind of covering and put it in the refrigerator and save it for another time. Or a very simple thing that I was taught as a child was to make just little cookies. So we're just going to roll this out. And anytime you roll something out, the trick to making it even is either to moving the dough like I'm doing and rotating it, or to rotate your roller and go from all the different edges. You don't want to just go this way because you're gonna end up with thinner dough in the middle. So you want to go all the way around. So I'm just going to make strip cookies. So I'm going to take a sharp knife. Whoops. This is kind of a fun thing to do with the kids because even though they may have to wait for the pie, for the satisfaction of the pie, they can have the cookies fairly quickly. So hopefully you can see this. Hopefully I didn't make this too back on my thing. So I'm taking an ungreased cookie sheet. I'm just going to put these on the cookie sheet. I have some melted butter. And then I have a cinnamon sugar. So I just took some sugar, mixed a little bit of cinnamon with it, and mixed a little bit of ginger. Again, like always, you can use any kind of spice that you like. I love ginger. So I'm going to add a little bit of ginger to that cinnamon mixture for these cookies. This is just kind of a, we're baking, we're going to save the pie for dessert. We're going to go ahead and do the cookies for now. So I just taken a little bit of melted butter and pat that on the dough strips. And then we're going to sprinkle the sugar cinnamon mixture on top of that. and then bake it in the oven for probably maybe 7 minutes until they're brown and crispy, and they're just little pieces of sugary dough, little satisfaction. All right, so that's that way. Not all this is going to stick on. Some of it will fall off when we take them off the pan, but that's okay. The oven's already on. The pie's in the oven. It's baking at 350, so we're just going to put this cookie sheet in there. And I have the timer set for my pie, so I'm just going to hang around for a few minutes and make sure that I don't let these overbake. Because obviously with the butter in the dough and the butter on top, if you let it set too long in the oven, it will definitely burn. So keep an eye on it. Alright, I'm going to put this in the oven. And then I'll clean out this surface so that we can come back and check things out. So here are the cinnamon sugar pie crust treats. So you can see the crust has puffed up. You can see the crust has puffed up. It's browned around the edges. So I'm going to take these and just set them on a plate. Let them cool for a minute, and we'll see if Mike's around to do a taste test. So of course, when I had the kids around, this is what they'd be snacking on right now. So, little pie crust treat cookies. Cup of coffee, cup of tea, glass of milk. They'll be yummy. Pie crust cinnamon cookies. So here's our pear pie. Hopefully you have no problem seeing that. It's nicely browned. It's not too jiggly. Now, unfortunately, the best way to eat this pie is to let it cool down. So we're going to let it cool. We'll probably have some for dinner tonight. It's actually better if you let it set for 24 hours and let the flavors meld. But we can never do that. It's really good for coffee in the morning with breakfast. It's going to let it cool. And there's the pear pie. Mike's favorite, not hard to do. Not a lot of ingredients, mostly things you're going to have in the house. And I guarantee you, you will enjoy it.
Pear pie. Okay, disclaimer. My wife is an awesome cook. I love everything she makes. But in all honesty, in all fairness, this is the ultimate. The only bad thing I can say about Paula's pear pie is she cuts them in too small of pieces. Okay? The crust, just everything. Look at this. Everything about it is just awesome. I love it. I love it. The only reason pears exist is for this purpose. In my book. That's it. No other reason. There's no reason to have a pear. Pear pie. You got to try it. But not mine. Not faking it, folks. This is for real.
Try it.
I love this stuff.
You can do it.
I love this stuff. Along with a cup of coffee.